Hi everyone, this is Pastor Dan from Calvary Chapel, Cle Elum, Washington. Have you ever engaged in frantic praying? I have, and I'm pretty sure everyone has and does from time to time. Frantic prayers are usually those short prayers that we utter, sometimes without really intending to pray, when we're desperate because our circumstances are desperate. Sometimes we are intending to pray, but because we're desperate, the prayers are very, very quick and to the point. You know, I believe some of the best prayers prayed are the prayers that are the shortest and the ones that are to the point. Many of these are what we might call quick distress calls offered to God in the heat of a crisis. I'm sure we've all prayed those kinds of prayers before, when there is absolutely no time for formality or structure. Again, those kinds of prayers are sometimes the best that we can pray because generally they come from the heart without any pretense. Psalm 70, I think, is an example of one of these frantic prayers of David. And I think this prayer is very typical of us whenever we get to the place of prayer when we don't like to wait on God. We just want God's help and we want it now. It's not that our faith in God is lacking. We know He is able to help. We just don't know if He'll help in time. It seems we find ourselves in these kinds of situations more often than we'd like. And so the psalm begins in the New Living Translation with the title, A Psalm of David Asking God to Remember Him. Maybe we can identify with David here. In verses 1 to 3, David cries out to God for God to deliver him from the desperate situation of his enemies who are trying to disgrace him and do him in. Look at verse 1. He says, Hasten, O God, to save me. Come quickly, Lord, to help me. Now think about this for a minute. Isn't it interesting how that we are often so slow and reluctant to obey God in the various different aspects of our lives? It often takes all kinds of prodding, all kinds of pushing, all kinds of negative circumstances for God to get me to a place where I'm willing to do what He wants me to do. I'm often slow in my response to Him. I take my time in obeying Him. But then I turn it around, and when I call on Him, I want instant action. Make haste, O God. I wonder if sometimes He just wants to let me see what I am doing to Him, sort of giving me some first-hand experience of what it feels like to be put off and put off. It's often true, though, that a person doesn't pray until it's a last resort, and then it's this hurry-up sort of thing. Everything else has failed, so I'm finally calling upon God, and we so often wait until the 0 hour before we call. Anybody here listening guilty of that besides me? And so when we pray, we say, Lord, make haste. Hurry up, Lord, in other words. And if God doesn't hurry up, then we get mad at Him. Really, when you think about it that way, does that seem right to you? And yet we often pray with that kind of an expectation. Look at verses 2 to 3. He says, May those who want to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. May those who say to me, Aha, aha, turn back because of their shame. Now let's remember that these are people who are trying to kill David, and he knows it. They are people who want to hurt him, and they are insulting him with these words, Aha, aha. When we say aha, we usually mean that we've just learned some new insight. We would say, Aha, I get it now. I didn't understand it before, but now I do. We call it sort of an aha moment. But in the Hebrew language, when they use this word aha, they were using it as a type of scorn or a put down. Just look it up in a concordance and you'll see that it's always used in a negative way. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, there were those who passed by and were told they were blaspheming Him, wagging their heads and saying, Aha, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross. It was an expression of derision, and they were saying this to David. So, for these who wanted to kill David and hurt him, He prays that they would be ashamed and confounded, turned back and confused. Really not an outrageous request at all. If somebody were trying to kill me, I'd sure want them to be ashamed and confounded and turned back and confused, wouldn't you? But now notice David's tone and his emphasis changes in the last two verses. David prays for rejoicing in those who seek God. Instead of being frantic, he wants those reading to be joyful. Notice verse 4. He says, "But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who long for your saving help always say, 'The Lord is great.'" So in contrast to those that are seeking David's hurt, we have here those that are seeking the Lord. And rather than being put to confusion, being ashamed, confounded, and turned back, he says, let them rejoice and be glad in you, and let God be magnified. I can't help but think that if we would seek the Lord early on, before things got desperate, maybe we wouldn't end up being frantic and desperate. Can we pray this when we're going through the difficult and trying time? We all know how to cry out to God in that tough time, but can we also rejoice and be glad and be magnified in Him during that tough time? Who knows that maybe all those tough times we go through are first and foremost a test, at the very least, of our ability to trust God in those times. But now notice verse 5. He says, "But as for me, I am poor and needy. Come quickly to me, O God. You are my help and my deliverer. Lord, do not delay." This is a good thing, since David is clearly taking no confidence in himself at this point. He says, "But I am poor and needy." That's the place we all need to be if we want God to help us. If we don't come to this place of knowing our need and our inability to meet our own need, chances are we won't come to God for His help. The first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And the second step is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then the third step, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Great steps for sure, but it's really nothing new at all. It's what people have been having to do since the Garden of Eden. David knew that his protection would not come from his own abilities, from his own smarts, but it would come from God. And so he cried out all the more, "Make haste to me, O God." He knew that only God was his deliverer and his help. And certainly the same is true for us. Remember, let's not make prayer a last resort so we get to this desperate kind of a state. Let's make it the first thing we do, and let's accompany it with praise and joy, as well as the understanding that God is never late in coming to help us. And because He is never late in helping us, let's not be late in obeying Him and seeking to do His will. I hope this has been helpful in getting our perspective and our attitude where it ought to be. If it has, would you do me a favor and give it a like, a comment, and share it on your own Facebook page? And if you're watching on the Calvary Chapel Cle Elum YouTube channel, would you subscribe to the channel? If you're in the Cle Elum area and you don't have a home church, would you consider joining us on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. at 417 East Railroad Street in Cle Elum, Washington? Again, this is Pastor Dan from Calvary Chapel Cle Elum. May God bless you. May He give us all courage and joy in the midst of our trials, and may we enjoy His protection in any danger we might face. God bless you.